Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. And today we're going to be discussing the implications of what has been happening with the drone attacks, with Russia's incursion into Poland, and how that has influenced NATO in the past couple of weeks.
My name's Kurt Volker. I'm a former U.S. ambassador to NATO and also former special representative for Ukraine. And I'm here in Kyiv and stay very much involved with trying to help Ukraine.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for doing that. As someone in your field, you will probably have a lot of opinion and a lot of opinions about what happened in Poland in the past couple of days. So I'll give you my take, and then I would like to hear yours. Right?
Okay.
There have been a lot of incursions into Poland from various Russian drones, as I see them as small escalations to kind of feel out the ground, but they were deemed mistakes, and so nothing was really done about it, and nothing was put forth other than strong words of condemnation of Russia's actions. Now, a couple of days ago, there were upwards of 10 drones, according to various different sources. It's from 10 to 15. I guess we'll never know. Came in from Belarus into Poland, and they were heading for, again, to varying reports, either Polish cities or NATO bases in Poland, which I think is a very strong escalation and is also an act from Russia to see what NATO is going to do. In my personal opinion, it's more so not even what NATO is going to do, but whether NATO, and by NATO, I guess, at the helm with the US, whether they're going to stick up for Eastern Europe, because in Russia's mind, that's not as valuable as Western Europe, and whether NATO is going to have a reaction. What's your take?
Well, first off, you're right. This is not the first time that Russia has flown drones or missiles through Polish or Romanian NATO airspace. But this is much more intentional. So it's a large number simultaneously, going deeper into Polish territory, doing it from Belarus. So this is very deliberate. And this is designed to do two things. I think it's first to test, see how NATO responds, both immediately in terms of shooting them down, but also politically and subsequently what kind of actions NATO takes or doesn't. And second, it was intended to be a bit of a warning that if you don't put more pressure on Ukraine to get them to surrender territory, then you might face a wider war. So it was intended to warn NATO countries as well to start putting more pressure on Ukraine. Interestingly, the drones appear to have been unarmed. Of course, there's no way NATO would know that. As they're flying in, NATO did take down as many as they could. I read a report that 9 had been taken down. But clearly Russia was not trying to attack per se. They're just trying to send a signal. And that is pretty much what the vague messages from Kremlin spokespeople in the next day all indicate, that this was intended to send a bit of a signal for us to figure out. I think NATO's immediate response of shooting them down was exactly what was required. It's about time. We should have shot down things violating Polish airspace before this. The subsequent response to say, okay, we need a military assessment. Fair enough. You do need a military assessment. You don't want to misunderstand. And it could be that there are things that will come out of that assessment that tell us more than we know right now. For example, we don't know for sure exactly how many drones did come in. We know 9 were shot down. Did more come in and leave Polish territory? Don't know. And then what is critical, however, is that the response from NATO not just be to say, okay, well, that's done. To ignore it, or even to treat it as a mistake, or just say, well, we're not happy about it, and then that's all. I think it's very important that NATO take a step proportionate to what Russia has done here to say that this is not an acceptable thing and we will not tolerate this. My recommendation is, in addition to having the Article 4 consultation that Poland has called for, NATO should then decide to create an extended air defense zone around NATO territory. I would suggest 200 kilometers is a good distance, and it would have to be done in cooperation with Ukraine or at the invitation of Ukraine, so that not only would things not fly into Polish territory in the future, but anything getting within 200 kilometers of Polish territory should be taken down. And that, I think, would be an appropriate and strong measure for NATO to take, and is zero threat to Russia. Anyone who argues that this is a provocation or escalation or a threat to Russia, it's nonsense. Russia has no business flying dangerous objects toward Poland from 200 kilometers away in somebody else's airspace. It has no business doing that. So I think that it is high time that we create such an exclusion zone.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I think there was a conversation about it a year ago coming from Ukraine, saying that it would make sense after the first drones flew in for you guys to kind of protect yourself, and in that way also relieve our air defense that we keep in the West, where nothing happens as often, that we could maybe cycle to Odessa or Kharkiv or cities that need it more. But we can't, for instance, we can't cycle our air defenses out of Lviv, where, because of the logistics and because of all of the humanitarian aid and aid in general passing through it, right? But in reality, Lviv gets attacked 3 times a year.
Yeah, no, I proposed it a year ago as well. I wrote about it for SIPA and revived that article in online distribution again just the other day. But it is the sort of thing we should do. And you're right, it could have a derivative effect of allowing Ukraine to defend other areas. But the explanation for this, the justification for this from a NATO point of view, has very clearly got to be based on Russia's violation of NATO airspace and the threat to a NATO population.
Of course, everything that results in the easement of circumstances for Ukraine is sort of the easing of circumstances for Ukraine is kind of just a derivative. But of course, I do believe that in general, NATO's response for NATO's sake should be quite stern. And I don't mean as in stern warnings and stern condemnations. I mean direct actions, because we've seen what happens every single time that NATO issues strong warnings and actions and words. Russia takes it as exactly what they wanted to hear, and continues to escalate further, because they know that nothing is going to come out of it and nothing is going to happen to them. So I do believe, I am very happy that Article 4 was triggered, because I think that that's at least a doctrine response to the situation, rather than just having the Polish prime minister tweet on X that he doesn't like what happened. So, at least
NATO has meetings every day. But to have one that we formally put under an Article 4 label, that's a good step. But then that has to result in something.
Of course, just a meeting itself is not enough. And I personally think that if there is no action that's going to result from this particular incursion taken on behalf of NATO, then Russia is going to keep escalating further. And that's just going to be a major mistake in the defense of the European countries. Another major mistake in the defense of European countries, as isolating this war to Ukraine and isolating Russia to be mostly a Ukrainian problem, while it's actually quite rapidly becoming a worldwide problem, both politically and culturally and societally and well, now militarily. So how much are we going to allow it? What do you think would be the absolute best course of action to take in the immediate, 2 weeks from the NATO standpoint?
Yeah, well, as I said, have the Article 4 meeting, decide on a further step. I think that step should be declaring of an exclusion zone, say 200 kilometers, that NATO will not tolerate foreign dangerous objects flying in that area.
Do you think that this incursion in particular, because this one was deliberate and very different from everything that has happened before, do you think it changed the way that I guess NATO, well, Europe and NATO as a whole, but mostly Europe sees Russia's war and how it actually directly affects them, rather than just us here in Kyiv?
Yeah, I think people had already figured this out. They had figured out that if Russia is successful in taking over Ukraine, that it will keep going. It's not going to stop there. They have been subject to hybrid attacks by Russia in other means for years, and they know that. They know from Putin's own words, his interviews, his speeches, his long essay, that he has designs on rebuilding the Russian Empire that would come at the expense of Europe. And so they're already aware of this, and they view establishing or reestablishing Ukrainian security as vital to general European security. So I think that's already there. It creates a sense of immediacy when it comes to resources and decisions.
Mhm.
It's always easy to know that this is an issue, but then put off dealing with it. And I think it does create a bit more of a sense of immediacy.
For sure. Well, I mean, I do agree that everyone sort of understood for a while now that if Ukraine is taken over, then that's a problem for Europe. But I wonder if there is more of an understanding that Ukraine doesn't have to be taken over for it to be a problem for the Western world. And I guess I mentioned this today for the first time in a while, but I think, in my personal opinion, Russian tanks don't have to be rolling through any cities for Russia to be at war with you. So, for instance, there is a lot of Russian influence in the United States, right? There is a lot of Russian influence in France. There is a lot of Russian influence in Italy, and a lot of it is, we see a lot of political events boiling right now, right? There is a vote of no confidence in France. There is there are disgraced diplomats in the UK, and there was that whole scandal, right? There is Charlie Kirk, who was a MAGA spokesperson, I suppose, or a far right talking head, who was just shot yesterday at a convention, right? And while these are not necessarily coming from Russia and they're not Russia's fault directly, right? It's the heating up of Russian propaganda and it taking its own life and its own course and evolving and kind of mutating through people and their own agenda that brought us here in the world today, 3.5 years later, or rather a couple of decades later, because let's face it, Russia didn't start this in 2022. So do we think that these military provocations are now strengthening the Western understanding of, hey, this is not a danger that might happen in the future if Ukraine falls. This is not a danger that might happen a year or two from now. This is happening today.
Well, as I said, I think that understanding was already there. You've had Russia organize demonstrations in other countries and pay for the protesters. You've had them conduct arsons. You've had them conduct targeted assassinations in NATO territory. You've had them bribe politicians, pay for political parties, interfere in elections, propagate disinformation, and particularly use RT, Sputnik, and social media to skew the dialogue in our own countries. So I think everybody knows that. They know that Russia has been conducting a hybrid war against the West for some time now. This is one more thing. It is potentially more kinetic than some of the other things that Russia has done to date, but it is not of a different nature. And I think people, they already know this, and it's just a matter of time before something like this happened.
Do you think it's going to, well, as you said earlier, right, that the understanding is there, but the ability or the willingness to take action isn't? Do you think that might change in the near future?
Yeah, because of a greater sense of urgency that, okay, we now need to take a step. And I think that will probably be specifically in the air defense area, making sure that we have air defense assets deployed and ready. We happen to have what we had there, but it can always be improved and beefed up. I suspect that will happen. Everyone is already committed to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. There might be a bit more urgency in getting the funding out there and getting procurement done so that there's more defense capacity out there. But I think one dimension that may be underestimated by NATO countries is the need for a strong response in order to impact Putin's decision-making. He is waiting to see if there is a robust warning, a robust action by NATO that would make a difference to Russia's ability to conduct the war.
I think, if I may say, it's also not just a robust warning by NATO, it's likely a robust warning by NATO at the helm with the United States, and the United States needs to be in on it and very much repeating the same,
Yeah.
rather
Well,
not even.
yeah, I'll give you the example of Turkey, where some time ago,
Mhm.
Russian airplanes were violating Turkish airspace in order to conduct airstrikes in Syria. And the Turks warned them a couple of times, don't do that, don't use our airspace for this. And the Russians kept doing it. So they shot down a Russian fighter. And then the Russians stopped doing it.
Exactly. Well, honestly, in layman's terms, I think Turkey has the biggest capacity, I guess, in NATO to sort of enforce their stand their ground. I've seen a lot of actions from Turkey where they absolutely do not tolerate any sort of incursions, and they do not tolerate any sort of provocations. They give you a warning, they give you a second one. No, okay, you're done. And they do not consider it as an act of war. They're not scared of what the retaliation is going to be, because they understand that no one's going to retaliate because they know their own abilities.
Yeah. Very matter of fact.
Yeah, and I do think that NATO needs to sort of needs to borrow that tactic and that approach from Turkey. Now, a lot of people are very interested on, and I know Donald Trump has been preoccupied, and his bandwidth is likely way too extended with everything that's happened in the past couple of days, and he will likely be taking a lot of time tweeting or truthing about Charlie Kirk and how those were the terrible Democrats that did that. But outside of that scope, um, do we expect him to stand up for Europe and to take Europe's side in this? Because I think that's what Russia really wants to know. Russia wants to know what Trump is going to be doing and thinking about this.
I think it'll be more nuanced than that. I think Trump will want Europe to respond. European NATO members say, okay, it's your territory. You should be the ones to defend your territory. Don't always look to the US. But, we'll have your backs. We're allies. We support you, but you have to do this.
Yeah, I guess what I was saying is that, yes, because I obviously don't expect the United States to take the lead in defending Europe in this case, but I do think that Trump taking a stand with Europe and saying that the U.S. is there to support, and the U.S. is there to protect their allies no matter what is very important in this case, because frankly, and as a political analyst and someone who's been sort of looking at the picture between the US and Ukraine and Europe specifically for the last 3.5 years, I think the only thing Russia really cares about is what the US thinks and what the US is going to do.
The current U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker, put out a tweet yesterday reiterating, we'll protect every inch of NATO territory, which is the right message to convey, and it's good that he did so as the U.S. ambassador.
Yeah, I do. I do agree with that, and I do think that was the right move. I'm, however, worried. We have quite an interesting delegation of people dealing with the war in Ukraine, from the United States to Russia, and I wonder what that's going to be like, because I'm assuming that I'm assuming those same people are going to be dealing with the information out of Poland.
In the U.S. administration, it's only Donald Trump that matters. No one else is a decision maker. No one else has a say over what we do. It's really Trump himself. So I wouldn't worry too much about the eccentricities of the people that we have. I think it all boils down to Trump.
Well, I think it's more of, for me, it's not the decision making; it's the messengers. For instance, we have certain individuals going to Russia and refusing professional translators and professional transmitters, and deciding that Kremlin interpreters are just as good as anyone neutral provided by the United States government, and based on what they hear from those translators is what they then bring back and put out into Trump's ears.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to how that's going to translate. What do you think is going to be the general picture politically around the world now in the next coming weeks, based on what had happened right now?
Well, I don't think that this makes any kind of material change to what we've already known. Russia is embarked on this imperialist and genocidal quest to eliminate Ukraine. Ukraine is never going to allow that to happen. Europe is never going to allow that to happen. The US wants to stop the war and get back to doing business, but Putin doesn't want to stop. So we have a impasse with Putin right now. That all is pretty much the way things are going to be for a while. I think the critical things will be later this year. If we find oil prices stay low, and especially if we put in place secondary sanctions on those who are engaging in trade with Russia on oil and gas, that will hurt Putin's budget. His ability to spend money to keep up the war. That will be a problem. And secondly, if we keep up the flow of arms and ammunition to Ukraine, as we are now doing, I think that will also have an impact on Putin's thinking and how much more lives and treasure is he going to spend on this if there's a pretty much unlimited supply of support going to Ukraine. So I think later this year we'll start to see how that plays out in Putin's thinking. But for now, this is not going to make any big strategic change.
For sure. I mean, as for Putin, I don't think it's necessarily the lives that he will care about. It's the money. I think all that it comes down to in Russia is the money.
And it's not only money for money's sake. It is money because that is the way of exercising power. And that's what he cares about. I'm going to have to run now, but I appreciate the time and the interview, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Of course. Thank you so much for your commentary. It was very, very nice to have the opportunity to speak to you.
Okay, great. We'll do it again sometime.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation and it was as interesting to you as it was to me. And if it was, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, and of course, send this video to a friend, give it a like, and if you have something to say, don't hesitate to do so in the comments down below. See you next time.